Me. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, etc. We have another exciting session for you today. We're going to the Isle of Man, and then we're going to America, and then we're going to County Down. But first of all, parish notices. Our next meeting will be on the 6th of November, where we have another 3 excellent papers for you. Have a look at the website. Pretty soon it will tell you who's on. A few other notices. We have the Broadside Extra conference in Dublin this coming Saturday. Join in online. Tickets are free. So if you go to the TSF website, you can find out how to join us. You can come in person as well if you want to in Dublin. That's next Saturday. Don't forget English Folk Dancers Song Society Vaughan Williams conference on the 12th and 13th of November. Again, a hybrid conference, so you can join in online or in person in London at Cecil Sharp House. And then lastly, we have a new book by the Ballad Partners, which I'll show you at the end of the, if I remember it, called Thirsty Work, which is the collection of papers from these TSF meetings, a selection of some of those. And it's a particularly, somebody's showing it. Thank you, Sue, down the bottom on my screen. It's not up on the website yet, so you can't buy it yet, but it will be very soon. The Ballad Partners website, or keep an eye out on your TSF newsletter. We'll tell you when it's ready for purchase. As I say, it's a particularly strong set of papers. So we're going to start with Stephen Miller, who's going to take us to the Isle of Man for Halloween, I think. Are you there, Stephen? Yes, we have that. Yeah, perfect. You're muted though, Stephen. You're still muted.
Oh, I thought something would go wrong.
Right, you're unmuted. Good.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Start again. Are you quite sure about your Hop-tu-Naa? Have you got the genuine Hop-tu-Naa? It's about Holland Tide Eve songs in the Isle of Man. I think before I start to go on, sorry?
We don't have it on the screen yet.
I am screen sharing. Screen sharing is paused.
It was there. It's there until you unmuted, and then it went. Try again.
Oh, Lordy. Okay, I'll quit and I'll start. I'll exit the show and I'll start again. God, it all worked, didn't it? It was all, the magic was working.
There, perfect. Yes, a minute ago when we practiced. That's better. That's good. Yeah, we have it.
So it does move on. It does move on for you. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Right. So sorry about that. So this is the title of my talk here. Are you quite sure about your Hop-tu-Naa? Have you got the genuine Hop-tu-Naa? This phrase plays a role in the discussion that comes a little bit later. But I think for a lot of people, you may well need to know where the Isle of Man is. It's here. You might see here, it's in the north part of the Irish Sea. It's not off Liverpool, as a lot of people think. It sits in the north part of the Irish Sea. To the east, you notice you have the Lake District in there, Cumberland and Westmoreland, easily visible from the sort of the east side of the Isle of Man. North side of the Isle of Man, you can see you have Dumfries and Galloway there. And then over, you can just about see in an evening in the west, you can see County Down there in Northern Ireland. Another thing to sort of, give you a particular view here, this is the topography of the island. You notice that there's a range of hills in the middle of the islands, of sort of a rather flat northern plain there to the island. What this means is that most of the settlements are on the coast. And if you want to have a look here at the settlements themselves, these are the main settlements in the Isle of Man, and all of these places play a role in the talk today. Douglas is there in capitals there because it is now the capital itself. It didn't used to be the capital. That was Castletown until the 1860s, until the Mormon's curse was put upon Castletown, and then it moved to Douglas. Castletown, say, was the old capital. Douglas was the more brash commercial tourist centre of the island. Peel over there on the west coast is basically one time was a fishing village up until about the 1900s. Had a large fishing industry there, Kinsale mackerel fishing, herring fishing in island waters and the Shetlands. And then you have Ramsey there, which is basically a town that serves the Northern Plain, the farming community. Think about Ramsey, if you go to Ramsey, it's easier to buy a combine harvester or a tractor than it is to buy a car. That's how much of an agricultural centre Ramsey is. So what though is Hop-tu-Naa? This is a Facebook group set up in the Isle of Man to show that it's not Halloween. Whilst it takes place on the 31st of October, it has nothing to do with Halloween. And one of the most prominent visual features of Hop-tu-Naa are indeed these carved turnip lanterns, also Swedes as well, that you can make them from. And if you want to see them in action, this is a wonderful photograph here from 1960. This is from St. Thomas's Church School here. And you see the children here, this is at harvest tea. This is a very important role played by schools in the maintenance of Hop-tu-Naa and its particular promotion. Schools have children come in with their turnip lanterns. There is also to the newspaper, until recently, the Isle of Man Examiner, the island's main newspaper. It had the Young Folks League, which was a weekly column for children. Every time Hop-tu-Naa came up, there was always columns in there. It's a very good source of song text as well. And since the newspapers have been digitized, great source, numerous song texts have come to light. These children here are rather more, I think, staid about their lanterns. There's a great photograph here. This is from Murray's Road School here from 1951. This, to me, this is Hop-tu-Naa meets Lord of the Flies, I think. I mean, this has got a terrifying mob. We don't worry about the zombie apocalypse in the Isle of Man. It's more the children coming loose on Hop-tu-Naa. What, though, is Hop-tu-Naa? Basically, this is how I remember it as a child. Evening of 31st of October. Children used to be obviously the usual. It used to be adolescents in the in the 18th, 19th century. Children in the Isle of Man, they go from door to door. These carved turnip lanterns you see lit inside by a candle and singing the following short song: Hop-tu-Naa, Hop-tu-Naa. Ginny the witch went over the house to get the stick to ladder the mouse. Hop-tu-Naa, Hop-tu-Naa. Your mother's gone away and she won't be back until the morning. And then you knock on the door, and in my childhood, we were rewarded with money. Nowadays, it's sweets. And so, but if this was the only song text we had for Hop-tu-Naa, this would be a very, very short talk, and the shortest talk we would have here. There are many songs, but what I want to look at is where this particular song comes from, to trace the development of this particular song, because this song replaces in part a text that we have from the 19th century. What you might ask, though, is the historical depth of Hop-tu-Naa. Well, the first mentions we have are from the late 18th century. This is from the Reverend John Kelly's manuscript of his Manx English dictionary that he put together to help the clergy when they were translating the Bible from English into Manx Gaelic. And so this is on this, his head word here for year, yet in the Isle of Man, the 1st of November was called the New Year's Day, as the custom still with the mummers to say on this eve, tonight is New Year's. And then in the second version of the manuscript we have here, once again, we're told here, the mummers begin their petition in these words: tonight is New Year's night, Hop-tu-Naa, and so on and so on and so on. So we also have here another mention here. This is from Crujean's Manx English Dictionary. This dates his collecting was done in the 1820s, published in 1835, actually 1837. And once again, he has this sort of rather more circumspect one. He doesn't have any speculations as to whether this is the new year or not that's being celebrated. He has this different term, Banag. I cannot tell what this word means, if not the Manx ballads. I've heard it used for a rhyme said or sung on Holland-tide Eve. So that's the evidence. So we have this custom, certainly known from the late 18th century. First mention we have, though, of the particular custom itself comes from Joseph Train. This is from Train's historical and statistical account of the Isle of Man. Although Train, for his passages on folklore, used a manuscript provided for him by Peter Curfey, who ran the Manx Sun newspaper. He ran the printing office for the newspaper. Here again, we start to see this speculation that continues to this day, that it's Halloween, it's a Druidical festival, it's the Celtic New Year. But we have here at the first mention here of sort of, in some ways, two song traditions here. We have texts in Manx, they say, promulgated by Manx by a young man who stood at the door, rhyme in Manx beginning, And then another mention, obviously, on Hollandtide Eve, boys go round the towns bawling lines, of which the following is an extract. And this is the extract. Now, if this was again, this was the only other text we had, this would be yet again another very, very, very short talk. But this, as you can see, this is a completely different text from the one I just showed, the one that children now sing. And this is a much longer text and a much, I would say in many ways, a particularly bizarre text. I say this is an extract, and this is basically the fuller text. This is a text collected by Dr. John Clegg, well known as a folk song collector and a folklore collector, collected by him likely in the 1890s and published sort of after his particular death. And this is a sort of a rather fantastical text here as well. You know, it starts off, the moon shines bright, there's what heifer shall we take? There's, I mean, a lot of, you can see that there's some feasting going on here. There's the slaughter of an animal, there's the making of broth, the scalding of your tongue, you go to the well, on the way back, you meet a polecat, you run to Scotland. What were they doing there? Baking bannocks and roasting collops. Then there's this woman cutting cheese, cutting her finger, and so on and so on. An absolutely bizarre, fantastical set of events. I mean, you just can't figure out what really is going. As ever, a lot of people have seen from this particular text, because of its mention of animal slaughter, this is a folk memory of the sort of the slaughtering of cattle, salting down of cattle, getting ready for the winter months. But whatever, this is the particular what I describe here as the 19th century song text. Well, all well and good in many ways until we get on to T. Brown, who I say best way to describe T. Brown was he was a professional Manxman. He later became the Manx national poet only after his death, of course. He was the sort of person who'd pop up on any occasion when you had any particular event to do with the Isle of Man. And this is a talk that he gives in 1881 to the Liverpool Manx Association at their tea party and concert. The talk is later repeated in 1893 and 1895, fully reported in the newspapers, thanks goodness. And this we start saying, then what about Hop-tu-Naa? Are you quite sure about your Hop-tu-Naa? Have you got the genuine Hop-tu-Naa? This is what they have in Castletown, and a part of it I'm sure you have not. Of course, part of it was the Hop-tu-Naa, familiar in any part of the island, and then comes a part peculiar to Castletown. He is well aware that the text that he's talking about is what I've just shown there, is what I call the 19th century text. He knows that this text is sung in Ramsey, he knows this text is sung in Castletown, in Douglas rather, and this text is sung in Castletown, but there is something going on here. As he says, there is a part peculiar to Castletown. Well, this is the part that is peculiar to Castletown. And so you can see here we have part of the, what I call the 19th century text is still there, going to the well, drinking the fell, meeting a cat, the cat began to run and so on. But inserted into this particular text is this new text. Ginny Squinny went over the wall to get a rod to beat the fowl. Ginny Squinny went over the house to get a rod to beat the mouse. Ginny Squinny went over the cladder to get an apron full of barra. And so I see in this text the skeleton for what is to become the Ginny the Witch text. See the middle lines there. Ginny Squinny went over the house to get a rod to beat the mouse. Now, it's clear that from other later collectors that this text then becomes free-floating. Now, I'm not certain if this text is free-floating to begin with and then gets itself inserted into the 19th century text, or whether it is inserted in the 19th century text and then floats free. But once again, this is from Dr. John Clegg. This is from his particular notebook, and this is what he records. Ginny Squinny went through the hole to get a rod to hunt the fowl. Ginny Squinny went over the house again to get a rod to beat the mouse. These familiar two lines. Ginny Squinny went up the cladder to get an apron full of barra. And what we have in this period is this text. Often the lines are rearranged. The couplets are in particular different orders, but it is basically the sense that is in the particular Clegg text, although with differing character names. So I'm not going to read them all out, but the people whose names have an asterisk after them, who collected these particular texts, are all in some particular way connected with Castletown. T. Brown, of course, his talk was given in Castletown. Clegg was the surgeon and doctor in Castletown. Cyril Payton, although English, had a house in Castletown. Charles Watterson was the town clerk. John Camace wrote about Castletown, and George Freestone. That text, 2009, I collected that myself from George Freestone. Fascinating character. When you meet someone in a care home who describes himself as Prince Valentine, being a folklorist, you know the guy isn't off his tree, but he actually used to be a mummer. He was in the White Boys in Castletown, and the role he played was Prince Valentine. But that's what I collected from him, Ginny Swinny. Once again, this particular text has no mention of Ginny the Witch. You know, there's a whole set of different names here. And so once again, the first question I had for myself, that we've all had, is when is the first mention of Ginny the Witch? Fortunately, because as I mentioned, and as Steve mentioned too in his talk the other time, we've had the newspapers in the Isle of Man digitized. And as a result, what popped out from the Manx Sun for 1900 is our first text here that mentions Ginny the Witch. And once again, we have the usual, these common set of lines here. Ginny the Witch went over a house to get a stick till out of the mouth. Ginny the Witch went to Cladder to get her apron full of faggots. Now, as regards Ginny the Witch itself, I've only ever managed to get one particular mention of Ginny the Witch, and it's in fictional form in a story serialized in the Manx Sun in 1889. This is the story. Here's Ewan Begg, or the Laxey Miner, turns up nowhere else bar in the song. This is the only mention we now have bar this reference in the Manx Sun in 1889 comes up in the song. Ginny is quite a familiar by name in the island in the period here. This is once again, I've traced these here from the particular newspapers here. Ginny skip the gutter, Ginny jingling Ginny, Ginny jump over the gutter, and gentle Ginny, in other words, Jane Quayle. So Ginny is there as a name, but also another thing too is when you look at particularly the records of the Folklife Survey, when you look at files dealing with witchcraft, with magic, whatever, the sort of like the name that stands in for anyone who's a witch in the Isle of Man is Nan Wade. You know, this is the name that's used for wise women across the island is Nan Wade, who we do know was a wise woman. No other mention of Ginny the Witch again, bar in this particular text. Once again, though, thanks to the particular newspapers, we have more detail here on the use here. In this particular case, it turns up as Jenny the Witch. But once again, we have sort of mentions here of Jenny the Witch. We have here what I like from the second example here of the Isle of Man Examiner here, the ancient harmony regarding Jenny the Witch. Well, the harmony may be ancient, but I think one of the arguments of this particular talk, or what I'm seeing in this particular talk, is that Jenny the Witch is not that particularly ancient, that this is an innovation in the textual history of these particular songs dating from the 1880s. The other interesting thing I find from this is two things. One, this is referring to Hollantide as Old Hollantide days. As you can see, the reports here from the 15th of November, the 14th of November. So these are, the kids are out and about on the 11th. They're not out and about on the 31st of October. They are still sticking to Old Hollantide Day. And the other mention to it mentions here Arbury. You need to know that Arbury is a parish in the Isle of Man, that Castletown sits in Maloo parish. The next parish across is Arbury. And once again, we're getting this report of what I see as this localized development of Ginny the Witch occurring down in the southern part of the island. And one of the sort of the remnants of that in many particular ways is that this is what we now call, or this is what has been collected in Castletown on several occasions. What we can now see is the remnant of the 19th century text, and we see here this particular text inserted, the one that T.E. Brown noted. I say this is recorded here from Charles Watterson. He was the town clerk of Castletown. George Freestone, who I mentioned there, he succeeded him as town clerk. Both of these people were responsible for organizing the White Boys in the Isle of Man, the mummers in the Isle of Man. He was a mummer himself as well, as I say, as was George Freestone, who was Prince Valentine. So that is how the Castletown song has remained. And we have yet again another particular text here from Castletown here, collected by Sue Woolley here. Ginny the Witch went over the house to get a stick to let of the mouse. Once again, familiar, those two, continuing that familiar couplet. And here again, we can see here a sort of an echo here of the 19th century text. Instead of you going to Scotland, you're going to London. And once again, these what you might consider this sort of nonsense nonsense plot, some nonsense going on here. What did you see? I saw a lady baking cakes. I asked for one, she gave me two, the best old woman I ever knew. So that is the song in Castletown. But as I mentioned, these songs now vary over the island, and we have yet more songs to look at. So that was looking at, as I say, we know the 19th century text was sung certainly in Ramsey, certainly sung in Douglas, and sung in Castletown, but with this extra episode, however you wish to look at it, it's extra, so it was either free floating, added to it, or develops as part of that text and then comes out and free floats as a particular song. So we move on to Peel, which is, you see here, once again, Peel here, once again, is on the western coast of the island, away from the influence seat of Douglas and Castletown and Ramsey, sits on its own out there. And this is what we have in Peel. This is the Peel song, collected by Sophia Morrison, published late in the Vocabulary of the Anglo-Manx Dialect in 1924. And this is a fuller text. I'll flick back to that other particular text, because that is an important text. This is a fuller text here, collected by W. Gill. And you can see here the same phenomena that T. Brown mentions in Castletown. We have the 19th century text, once again, put in the pot, skull of the throat, going to the well, meeting the polecat, starting to run. We get this extra episode inserted into the particular text here. I saw Ginny the Winnie go over the lake, a griddle in her hand, all ready to bake. Her teeth were green and her eyes were red, and a thickness of hair upon her head. And then we're back to the 19th century text here with the adventures in Scotland, baking bonnets, toasting scones, once again, asked her for a bit, and so on. Now, we flick back to that. Now, this Peel text, as I mentioned, the importance of schools in sort of maintaining, in many ways, the schools or the school in Peel, the clothworkers school, the primary school, has in many ways stabilized this particular text, because this is what they teach in schools. There's two particular reasons for this. One, that Peel has very much a notion in the Isle of Man that it's separate from the rest of the Isle of Man, that it's the most Manx part of the island. When I was young, there used to be a great saying was, leave the island and go and live in Peel. And they see themselves as being particularly separate. Sophia Morrison, who collected this particular text, she was responsible for the early attempts to revive Manx Gaelic in the Isle of Man in the early 1900s. She was the pan-Celtic activist par excellence. And this text has become established in Peel as the Peel text. And when you go collecting these particular texts, what you'll collect in the east side of the Isle of Man is the Jenny the Witch text. When you go to the west side of the island to go collecting, this is the this is the text that you will collect. And moving on, let's move on while I still have some time left. Let's move on to Ramsey. And once again, Ramsey has a separate text. And once again, this is text. This is actually, once I'm going to say once again, this again has absolutely nothing to do with the 19th century text. As you can see, the character of Ginny the Witch is there, but this is an entirely different text. Ginny the Witch, and you see this is one of these cumulative texts here. Ginny the Witch, she ate the house, she ate the mane and the tail, of course, then she eats the cow, then she eats the sheep, and she eats the hog. She goes into the house, she eats the rat, she eats the mouse. Ginny the Witch, she'll soon be in view. And if you're not careful, she'll eat you too. Ginny the Witch is in your house, give us a penny and we'll chase her out. That very much is the Ramsey song. So for an island which is particularly small, I should have indicated how big the Isle of Man was actually. It's 30 miles by 12, about 200 square miles. And yet we can see in the Isle of Man separate developments of these Hollantide Eve songs, these sort of Hop-tu-Naa songs, in the various particular towns and villages in the island. This is only a small number of the particular texts. There are a number of outlying texts as well that I haven't been able to consider here. And if I can just come to the end point here, this is great. Sort of Arthur Moore here writing to Clark Roeder, the German the German collector here, as to Hop-tu-Naa, there are scraps of it all over the island which vary indefinitely. And yes, I can certainly sort of attest to that. Here, once again, another sort of wonderful letter here from Edmund Goodwin to Sophia Morrison here from 1912. Some of his, i.e. T. Brown's Hop-tu-Naa lines are quite different from our Peel version. He has Jenny Squinny when we say Ginny the Winnie. So once again, these collectors were aware of variation of text throughout the island. And here, what I consider here to me, what I might like to say is this is my get out of jail free card here. This is from 1900. We cannot pretend to give the meaning of this wonderful and awe-inspiring doggerel, and the identity of Ginny the Witch must ever remain a mystery. Well, given that this is the person who gives us the first text that mentions Ginny the witch in it, I feel that if he couldn't figure it out or they couldn't figure it out, it's not really for me to try and figure it out. I'll just try and just try and detail it as best I can. So I apologize if I've been a bit too rapid with my particular talk, but if anyone wants a copy of the particular slides, if anyone wants a copy of the text as well, I can give you a copy of all of the texts mentioned in this talk and many other texts as well. I just wrote them up recently for another separate publication. And I'll just finish here with another final slide here, which I think this is the one that I really do love. This is from 1957. This is Geoffrey Bateman there, getting ready there with one of the largest turnips I've ever seen in my particular life. In many ways, you can see there that he brings things together now. This notion of what is he sort of intruded into the custom. There's this notion of witchcraft. You see he's clearly dressed up there with his pointy hat on there, but holding once again in his hand the carved turnip lantern, which is very much still the particular feature of this particular custom, this particular evening. So thank you, and thank you all again.
Right. Thank you, Stephen. Do you want to unshare? That's great. Lovely start to the evening. Well done. Anybody want to ask a question? Please put your hands up as always. A couple of very small, quick points, Stephen. One is that I was going to say this, and Sue Allen has said it in the chat, that there is a Jenny or Ginny green teeth in English folklore, and one of your texts, only one of them, as far as I could see, she had green teeth. And the other thing is, did you draw a line between Hop-tu-Naa and Hogmanay at the beginning?
No, I didn't. I mean, coming back to that, I mean, I think one of the particular problems we have in the Isle of Man, and that's, I think, is why that early map to show where the Isle of Man is so important, is that the Isle of Man just types itself as being Celtic. So everything that happens in the Isle of Man is Celtic folklore, and no one looks to, for instance, you know, to looking to Cumberland and Westmoreland, where we do know the children. There are reports in the dialect dictionaries that still tell you of children actually making turnip lanterns, just as it happens in Scotland, as well as in Dumfries and Galloway. And Reverend Walter Gregor, when he was collecting there, also picks up rhymes again on Holland Tide that the children do. It's tied up with Hogmanay. Yeah, it's a toughie, because I mean, no one really explains what Hop-tu-Naa means if it's just not a set of nonsense syllables, but it is so close to Hogmanay, as you start thinking that you could simply replace Hop-tu-Naa with Hogmanay, it would all rhyme, and it would make sense. So I can't really say anything to that.
Great. We've got to move on swiftly. We're going to go to Margaret. She's got a finger up as well as a hand up. Margaret Bennett.
I really enjoyed this immensely. I wonder if I can possibly, picking up Steve's comment, but going back to your very first theory by Cregeen that Bannock was a monk's term for ballad. I don't think so at all, because we have the word in Scottish Gaelic, and as you know, the Isle of Man was the southernmost part of the Lordship of the Isles, stretching right up the Western Isles with the same language. And we can understand Manx and they can understand Scottish Gaelic. So Bannock is actually the Gaelic word for Bannock. But then when you showed me the line of the poem, the nonsense, I was very excited, because you have, they went up, there's a mention of a Bannock there as well. They went up the Clather to get an apron full of, there was another word, barach. Well, they went up the shore to get an apron full of it's like a driftwood or the leftover little pieces of wood, is the leftover something. But we have a custom in Scotland, Aiche nam Bannock, the night of the Bannocks. And it's part of the Hogmanay comes in here. The theory is, or I would think that the Halloween traditions, Halloween was the old Celtic New Year. And those New Year customs are transferred to the New Year we celebrate now, starting with Hogmanay. The old customs of the Hogmanay started with Aichen and Bannock, the night of the Bannocks, when they went out guising or mummering, whatever you want to call it, dressed up, and at each house they would receive the gift of a Bannock. So I think that it's all very exciting with a lot more to look at. I was trying to look very quickly to see if the late Eric Regine had gathered information on it, and either his Manx collection or his Western Isles collection, but I couldn't catch that. But it resonates so loudly with Gaelic customs because of the language words that come in and the time of year that you have those customs. Immensely enjoyable. Thank you, Stephen.
And I should have pointed out, I was only dealing with the English texts, because there's obviously a good number of texts in Manx as well. I'll pass what I've got on to you, and you can.
But the problem is the English texts take over the Gaelic words, and we presume that they're English words, but they're not. I mean, they speak. It's peppered with Gaelic words, which Bannock being one and Aicha the other one, so it's fascinating. Thank you.
Right, can we move on to Steve? Steve Gardner.
Yeah, hi, Stephen. Yeah, I just wondered if you were aware of a well-known rhyme on the mainland that there may be some connection when it was changed to witch from other things, which is Winnie the Witch fell in the ditch, ha, ha, ha. It may have other bits to it as well. I'm sure it's a well-known piece on the mainland, and it might have been, some sort of filtering in from the mainland, or even the other way around.
Yes, I've heard it, because it is a children's jump rope rhyme in England. I mean, this was a surprise, because Doug Sandel, who has written on this, I remember I was together with Doug Sandel, and we were talking about this, and Doug Sandel's partner just chipped in and says, Ginny the Witch, I used that as a child. I used that as a jump rope rhyme as a child. Like, that's not possible. That's not possible. No, it's possible. Yeah, that is another, that's. All I can do at present is basically just give you, these are the datings for it. These are the datings. Clearly 1900, it's there, and yeah.
Right. Last question from Conrad. Hello, Conrad. You're muted, Conrad. You're still muted, Conrad. Conrad, you're still muted. Okay, we seem to have lost Conrad. I think we better move on. We'll get back to Conrad later on if he rejoins us, because we're over time already. So Nora's up next.
Hi.
Hi, Nora.
Okay, I'm gonna share my presentation and then, okay.
That's it, we got that.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, hello everybody, and I'm very happy to join you all again and to share my presentation on New England traditional music collector Eloise Hubbard Linscott. So with the 21st century has come a heightened appreciation of the importance of preserving diverse materials from and sustaining cultural traditions within communities of origin. Eloise Linscott was a housewife and folk music participant who devoted her life to broadly representative collecting and popular vehicles to support her region's living heritage almost a century ago. Women have played an important role in the collection of music across New England since the turn of the 20th century. Two of the most important were Fanny Hardy Exdorm, who in the 1920s co-authored several scholarly volumes on Maine ballads, and Helen Hartness Flanders, daughter of a Vermont governor and spouse of a United States senator, who during the 1930s through the 1960s compiled an extraordinary collection of traditional songs and published 9 scholarly texts. Like Flanders, Linscott was collecting the folk music of rural New England at the beginning of the Great Depression. But Linscott had relatively little social or economic status, little institutional support, and nothing but pin money to spend on her fieldwork. What she did have was a lifetime participating in folk song and dance, and a keen desire to preserve and promote them. At a time when most American collectors were recording limited materials for institutional preservation and scholarly use, Linscott's work, done by and for herself, was unabashedly pioneering. Her diverse collection, now housed at the American Folklife Center, holds over 400 sound discs and the other recordings she made during the 1930s through the 1950s. It also reflects her focus on traditions in their social context, across play and work, and popular vehicles to sustain them, family songbooks, folk and fiddling festivals, schools and community programs, and country dances. And it reflects Linscott herself, as music participant, collector, author, and advocate, in photographs, interviews, and correspondence. The daughter of a rural Massachusetts physician, Linscott grew up riding out with him at all hours. Her childhood was one of songs and games in her own backyard and Sunday evening sings for which her father played the concertina. She spent summers playing and teaching folk songs at her family's camp in New Hampshire. She took to country dancing as a young woman. For her, music was part of the emotional pattern of living. In 1921, she married Charles Linscott, an insurance broker, and settled in Needham. During the 1930s and 1940s, she kept a garden and sold vegetables on the roadside. The year of a hurricane, a First Nations lumberman taught her how to clear lumber at camp, and she worked in a sawmill. Linscott undertook collecting when she could not find a book of her childhood music for her son. She wrote down all the songs she could remember her mother singing and gathered them from family, friends, and neighbors. Soon, folks were sending her on to other folks, and each visit led further afield. She saved her pin money in an ocean spray cranberry tin, and when other duties allowed, she would count the money, look at the road maps, and write some people that she was coming. 10 years later, in 1939, she completed Folk Songs of Old New England, a songbook admired for including groundbreakingly diverse materials and making them accessible to a general readership across New England. It not only includes child ballads, but 28 children's song games with detailed directions and 35 country dances, with a glossary, diagrams, fiddle tunes, and calls. The central section contains 17 sea shanties, plus lumber and other work songs and related narratives. And the final section holds New England origin, as well as other ballads and ditties, including some for which her work is the only source. A fine example is The Brookfield Murder, a New Hampshire ballad of the 1847 murder of Susan Hanson by the man she sued for breach of their marriage contract. The Brookfield murder has come to light by a young man rather short of sight. Joe Buzzle he hired and drove young Coke to shoot the girl, so it seems to look. Folk Songs of Old New England has simple piano accompaniments and, unlike more scholarly publications, colorful biographies of her source singers and their own accounts of their songs' histories. It was used in households, schools, libraries, and camps for decades, and was reprinted in 1962 during the American Folk Revival. It was admired by scholars for some collectors' prizes, such as Fair Rosamond, an unusual version of Queen Eleanor's Confession, never before recorded in America. And most importantly to Linscott, it preserved indelibly the early community life of her territory. In early 1940, Linscott began her campaign to borrow a disc recording machine from the Library of Congress, explaining that while she realized accredited scholars should come first, she could find and enter many places that are closed to scholars. Eventually, with Alan Lomax's encouragement, she was lent a recorder in November of 1941 and given an allowance of $100 to see what she could get. Although she struggled getting the recorder clean of weeds, figuring out how to use it and connect it to her car battery, bumping it along remote roads across snow and ice and into a northern Maine town for repairs, she still packaged 50 glass discs by the end of the holidays. Some arrived broken or with poor audio quality, but some contained gems. Her crackly but still wonderful recordings of Happy Hale, a renowned black dance caller and fiddler in Massachusetts, were made when little collecting attention was being given to New England dance music. This is Hale's Darlin' Nellie Gray.
Now you right and left right through, and you right and left right back, and you swing your Darlin' Nellie Gray. Then you lead up to the next, then you balance, join your hands and circle all around. Then you right and left, right through, and you right and left, right back, and you swing your darling belly gray. Then
Despite applications, Linscott never obtained additional funding, but went on frugally collecting and advocating on her own throughout the 1940s and the 1950s. And she held to her purpose to keep the musical heritage of New England at hand for all to enjoy. Her fieldwork expanded organically through personal relationships and community memberships. When families learned she had little money, they offered her meals and a place to sleep. She churned butter, minded the kids, and hoed beans to leave more time for singing. Easy, unassuming, and attuned to the people, music, and ways of rural New England from childhood, Linscott found her way to tradition bearers outside scholarly collectors' usual circles. During the 1940s, she completed a second manuscript, Songs and Tunes from a Yankee Peddler's Pack. It, too, had a diverse assortment of songs and an emphasis on providing a practical resource for games and dances, and understanding and appreciating traditions in their social context. Because there was never any sense that she was anything besides herself, homemaker, neighbor's neighbor, music participant, what she was given was less constrained by hierarchy or self-censure. And because she was working independently, what she was interested in receiving was less dictated by external standards of propriety or value. Singers shared, and Linscott documented, some extremely rare songs in defiance of social conventions, such as Katie Cruel, a loose woman running straightway to her heart's desire, and First Families of Falls River, an 1880s recitation of prominent family names sung with gusto by a jovial, inebriated gentleman in the wee hours of the morning. She also received many unusual risque songs, such as this 1940 recording of lumberman Sam Young singing Hi Larry Jack in the Game, which he volunteered only at his wife's nudging when the session was otherwise over. Linscott flipped the disc to side B and was taken by surprise.
For I can mark down 3 points to your 1. I shuffle the cards, being my turn to deal them. I gave myself 1 trump, and that was the jack. I gave her the ace and the 2 spot to beat me, they being the very best cards in the bag.
Linscott also expanded her compilation of deep water work songs and mariners' stories, labours and tools, even the sounds of the dock and the ship's side sea. She was particularly concerned that this heritage not be neglected and lost as the seafaring industry changed and the number of tradition bearers dwindled. William Jack Sherrard of New Hampshire became her primary source singer. A first mate of square rigger days who recalled tales, yarns, and songs of the windjammers, his shanties were the heartbeat of a great ship as she rolls while the wind sighs in the rigging. From 1943 and into the early 1960s, she recorded and photographed him. She talked to school children about his music and trade, arranged his appearance at folk festivals, played his shanties in radio interviews, and remained his lifelong friend. Throughout the 1940s and into the 1950s, an increasing portion of Linscott's fieldwork was with country dance fiddlers and callers. The top flight fiddlers from whom she collected included Smith Payne, Roger Robinson, Ed Lewis, Ed Larkin, and Edson Cole, who was also a caller. Here is Edson Cole playing Soldier's Joy. Linscott's enthusiasm for her pioneering collection of fiddle tunes arose from her own joy in the music. She was said to test the potency of the rhythm by shaking the liveliest foot in the hall in the ladies' chain, and from her experience of country dance as a tradition in which the entire neighborhood danced for social pleasure as a community. She danced in schoolhouses, town halls, grange halls, and old barns all over rural New England. Always an active advocate and ambassador, she attended fiddle festivals and arranged fiddlers and country dances for folk festivals. If someone was needed to spend a weekend teaching and judging square dancing, she was the one they called. During the 1940s, she prepared her third manuscript, Square Dances and Fiddle Tunes of New England, Favorite Contra and Square Dances with Their Traditional Melodies. In over 150 pages, she details terms, patterns, steps, and calls for 45 different dances. The tunes were recorded from 16 different fiddlers from 5 New England states, including Linscott's friend Carrie Grover and Belle Weber, while the 15 prompters included Happy Hale and Doreen Ainsworth of Vermont. All supportive work on the manuscript was provided by women. Linscott's focus on popular vehicles reflected her recognition that traditional music is at heart participatory. The continued experience of shared community is essential to its preservation and evolution. Linscott also regularly gave presentations and taught songs to school children. In April 1940, her program with more than 50 pupils culminated in a concert with a local orchestra and, the following April, a wartime radio broadcast to families in England. She was a frequent and popular speaker at women's, historical, teachers, reading and neighborhood clubs and regional library programs. She often brought fiddlers with her, usually included sing-alongs, and occasionally enlisted her audience in a country dance. She took leading roles in regional folk festivals, including the Boston, New Hampshire, and New England folk festivals, facilitated participation by the tradition bearers from whom she collected, and worked to engage festival audiences with broad forms of traditional music. And she gave festival radio interviews, including excerpts of her diverse recordings, children's songs, lumbering songs, sea shanties, and fiddling. This outreach was another facet of her dedication to, as she said, a heritage which lies half forgotten and which must be preserved. In December of 1940, Maine resident Carrie Grover, who was born in rural Nova Scotia in 1879 but living in Gorham, wrote to Alan Lomax in response to his weekly radio folk music program. In April of 1941, she was recorded by Lomax's associate, Sidney Robertson Cowell, at Grover's son's home in New Jersey, and by Lomax at the American Folklife Center. The value of the material collected from her heightened the library's interest in what might be obtained from other New England informants, and facilitated Linscott's long-awaited recorder loan a few months later. In 1942, Grover, then aged 63, met Linscott, then aged 45, at a folk festival in Philadelphia and wrote to her. Their 12-year correspondence provides a touching window into a relationship founded in mutual understanding and expressed in a private, and so less socially constrained, space. The letters speak to the intentionality of Linscott's work and the centrality of music to both social and personal memory. Grover's handwritten letters were each several numbered pages long, sent frequently during their primary years of correspondence, sometimes only a few days apart, and full of the reminiscences, confidences, warmth, and digressions of intimacy. They convey her longing for Nova Scotia, her anxieties about her husband's failing health, and her own asthma, heart problems, and nerves. She openly expresses concern about finances, including the cost of medicines, and worries about the boys at war, writing at one time, "I don't usually tell my troubles to people." Not only does Linscott remind Grover of her own daughter, so full of music it just bubbles over, but there is a bond of sympathy between them. She writes, "It seems to me we are two of a kind except in age, and the music part of me is still young." And later, "Our music was born with us." Grover found in Linscott a friend and confidant who understood her deep love for her own family songs and tunes, and concerned that heritage be kept alive. Her letters are full of memories of her parents and siblings, interwoven with the songs they heard and shared, the time her elder brother spent in a lumber camp, her father's version of Mattie Groves, and the songs of a cousin's wife who was cook to a Nova Scotia sawmill. The women exchanged what they knew and sometimes assisted each other's quest for additional information. Grover wrote to Linscott of family histories, tunes, and lyrics of songs that just hinted at something wrong at the crossroads, songs of which she could not freely inquire to anyone else. They arranged to meet at other folk festivals, and Grover repeatedly invited Linscott to visit her at her son's near Philadelphia, where they might share a bed and have a dandy time with her daughter-in-law, or to come to Boston for another festival, or to visit Grover at home in Gorham, Maine. Linscott accepted the invitation to Maine in late October 1943 and visited for 3 days of socializing and sharing their joy in traditional music. She recorded 17 discs of Grover's singing and fiddle tunes. These included the beautiful Greenland Whale Fishery, a ballad of a whaling disaster.
Greenland, it is a cold country. No Christian can live there, where the rain and the snow and the stormy winds do blow, and the daylight seldom comes, brave boys, and the daylight seldom comes.
Grover also shared a number of less than totally proper songs which she had reservations about revealing to other collectors. Her free expression was undoubtedly aided by Linscott's own merry view of herself as a woman who had done lots of things that had not been very ladylike. Grover later wrote, "I sang one song to Alan Lomax that my oldest sister learned by listening to the men who worked in Father's mill when she was supposed to be in bed. I got the words all mixed up, for though it is a very tame song about a woman who hid her lover in a three-cornered cupboard, I felt foolish." She later nimbly sang Tri-Cornered Cupboard and other such songs for Linscott. This is Crockeryware, a night adventure song of a young man trying to find his sweetheart in the dark.
Come on, you rambling, roving sparks, who go a-courting in the dark. Don't stop your toe against a chair, or you will fall in the crockeryware to make a frightful love, I do.
Owing to their shared enthusiasm for traditional fiddle tunes, Linscott also recorded Grover's playing of 28 tunes when recordings of female fiddle players were still quite rare. The following year, Grover writes of a photograph Linscott took of her that the photo shows me as I am and I have no wish to appear otherwise. To those who love me, that picture would look natural and the divil take anyone else. This freedom to be herself is reflected in the unguardedness of Grover's later correspondence. In one she wishes, partly in anxiety about performing at a folk festival, that she and Linscott could let so-and-so go hang and fiddle and sing for ourselves instead. A few days later, though, she politely expresses regret over her remarks, writing, "I was feeling a bit childish and felt a dread of going to Boston. I wrote thoughtlessly." Among the things that drew Grover to Linscott was their driving desire that songs and tunes sung and played in families and communities like their own for generations be recorded, shared, and passed on. Grover wrote to Lomax, "I know that you have made a study of folk music and know more than I will ever know, but I am telling you something of real folks and the songs of real folks. To me, they are not only folk songs, but the songs of my folks, and just the sound of an old tune will often bring to me a picture of my father or one of my brothers, just as they looked when they sang it." And Linscott told a festival audience, "Yankee folk music is your priceless heritage. It's the song I heard an old lumberman roar as I sat on the oat bin and watched him bed down the black team. It's a tune I heard Captain Smith whistle as he worked on the sailboat some youngster would have for a toy. It's the songs of Aunt Sophie, the games of Cousin Hannah. It's the scrape of a fiddle and all the neighbors for 40 miles around swinging. That's the music of your family. That's the music of your own." For decades, Linscott was her own collecting trip assistant, transcriptionist, and bookkeeper. Until her death in 1978, at the age of 79, she curated a collection housed at home, reams of sheet music stored in her basement, stacks of discs in the sunroom, and a garage crammed with material. Thanks to Joseph Hickerson, former head of the archive, who recognized the importance of her work, her entire collection is now preserved at the American Folklife Center. Linscott's collection is one that she alone was in a position to assemble. She was a keen participant in traditional music and excelled in organic collecting. She stepped into rural homes and assemblies always in a communal spirit with a shared purpose. She embraced traditional music across contexts and forms and appreciated its symbiotic relationship with community identity. Her collecting work was exceptionally broad and contextual, and her finds sometimes rare. And her contributions substantially enriched the archival preservation of early 20th century New England folk music. For several decades, she expended her limited resources gathering folk music in books intended for the folks who sing the songs they love and remember from their homes to the fields of their labors, and for the country dancers themselves. She was a tireless educator and promoter who played a dynamic role in keeping traditional music accessible and alive in many New England communities, even as their environment changed. And her legacy continues 90 years later. She was, as Flanders' grandniece Nancy Jean Siegel dubbed her, the people's collector. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you, Nora. As always, Nora always gives us a really good presentation. And we mentioned the Thirsty Workbook at the beginning. That has one of Nora's papers in, or Emma Dusenbury, is that how you say it, paper in there. So buy that, even if you don't for anybody else, buy it for Nora's paper. We have a few moments for questions or comments. Nora, the first sound clip that you played about the Brookfield murder, was it?
Yes.
Who was singing that? Was that Linscott herself?
No, that's a recording. There is no recording of the song itself. It's just transcribed by Linscott. But so that was a recording of my singing.
Oh, that was just right. Okay, I understand it. It didn't sound like a scratchy old field recording. That's all I was getting at.
Yes, it's much more recent.
Anybody else got any comments or questions? No. Okay, we're happy to move on. Thanks again, Nora. That's great. Yeah. And we're going to move on quickly to...
I'm here for when you're ready.
Oh, right. Conrad, you are back. Right. Did you want to say something?
Yes, I've got just a brief one. In the Isle of Wight, you find wassail and other customs. The customs referred to in this paper refer to house boundary crossing, which is a door-to-door thing, which is an interim period where you find soul caking and firewood gathering, cob coaling in Lancashire. Its preparation is intense among children for Guy Fawkes bonfire. So that's basically, it's a transitional period into the Guy Fawkes where they are going to back door to door from firework money, cob coaling for coal and wood and other things. So that's how it sort of fits together. Hop-tu-Naa is New Year's, and it's quite a ways down the calendar from November to December 31st. So I would suspect it's mainly a transitional activity for kids to start the gathering process. That's it.
Thank you, Conrad. But we are going to move on and go to Jane and Maurice.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you. As you know, we're going to sing some songs from County Down and give a little bit of context. And just to set the scene, I'm going to quote a little bit of poetry from one of our most renowned Ulster poets, John Hewitt. Let Down be famous for care-tilled earth, for the little green hills and the harsh grey peaks, the rocky bed of the Lagan's birth, the white farm fat in the August weeks. The names of a land show the heart of the race. They move on the tongue like the lilt of a song. You say the name and I see the place. Drumboe, Dungannon or Annalong, Barony, Townland, we cannot go wrong.
Okay, so I'll sing you a song called The Star of the County Down. And it's one of these songs that is, it was collected way back in the 1940s from a collector called Richard Hayward. And he had a great version of this. The inclination is, for a lot of people, is that they play the song as fast as they can, which is kind of ruins the style of the song in terms of pace and that. So I'm just going to sing you the song anyway. Star of the County Down. Close to Banbridge town in the County Down, on an evening in July, down alone and sweet came a girl so neat that I smiled when she passed me by. She looked as bright with her step as light as the lap of a springtime hare, that I closed my eyes in a wild surprise to make sure I was really there. From Scrabo Hill to Lisnadill, and from Cumber to Newry town, there's no girl so neat as the damsel sweet. She's the flower of the county down. She's an eye as lush as a clucking thrush, and such light in her nuts brown hair, that the words I had in my mouth went mad, and I stood with my heart all square. As she onward sped, sure I shook my head, and says I to a passer-by, who's the girl so sweet with the twinkling feet? And I waited for his reply. From Scrabo Hill to Lisnadill, and from Cumber to Newry town, there's no girl so neat as that damsel sweet. She's the flower of the county down. To that spot next day I did make my way, and along came that lovely flower. At the charming sight my heart took flight, like a lark on the midday hour. But I stood my ground, and I quickly found on my smile she had always frowned. And such words I said, I will soon be wed to my flower of the county down.
Well, County Down has two great rivers, the Lagan and the River Bann, and water from the River Bann fed the growth of the linen industry in the Bann Valley. There were many bleach screens along the Bann, where the webs of linen cloth, thousands of yards long, were spread out on the grass to be bleached white by the sun. The cloth was valuable and had to be guarded, so a bleacher often worked at night, overseeing his bleach screen. Here's a love song from those times, where a girl has fallen in love with a bleacher boy. And the bleachers, as in many of the trades in linen, they rambled from place to place, depending on where the work was. So many's a girl was courted by a tradesman who then disappeared. So this particular bleacher boy has sailed off to the Isle of Man, actually, because from the shores of County Down, as you said, Stephen, you can see the Isle of Man. And where I grew up in Kilkeel, on a clear day, you could always see the shape of the two hills of the Isle of Man. This is the bleacher boy. Once I loved a bleacher boy, and he vowed he loved me, and we vowed to each other that married we'd be. All vows and protestations between us he broke. He has now gone and left me. He has me forsook. My love is tall and handsome. He's fit for a queen. At the foot of yon churchyard, he keeps a bleach green. occupation is bleaching green, linen white. Some say he's a sailing unto the Isle of Man. Some say he'll ne'er prosper for what he has done, but I wish him safe sailing and a fair wind to blow, and my blessings be on my bleacher boy, wherever he does go.
I'm going to sing you a song called The Maid of Balladoo. And in July 1953, Peter Kennedy and Sean O'Boyle recorded Joe Brannigan, a cattle drover from Mourne country. Now, Joe mischievously posed a question to the two song collectors, and he said, "Would you like me to sing with the piano, or do you prefer the raw bar?" Well, it was the raw bar that he got. And the raw bars singing unaccompanied, just in case you're not familiar with the expression. So Joe described the landscape of Balladoo, where he lived, in graphic detail. It's an agricultural part. It is where they would make you a drop of poaching, snare a hare, shoot a grouse, or court a nice wee girl. Anything at all like that. You know what I mean. For sport and hospitality, the best people in the world. The song was the work of an educated weaver who could have been a member of one of the many reading societies that proliferated in County Down during the 19th century. And this song is peppered with classical references to the Roman and Greek gods and goddesses such as Flora, Aurora, the Grecian queen, and it was a typical feature of 18th century head school masters. And you note the use of alliteration. There's plenty of it in this particular song. So this is The Maid of Balladoo. It was on a summer's morning, all in the month of May, down by yon shady arbor I carelessly did stray. 'Twas there I met my charming maid, most pleasant to my view, and the title that she gave herself was the Maid of Balladoo. I boldly stepped up to her, and unto her did say, "Are you Aurora, or Flo, the Queen of May? Or is it fair Helen that appears all in my view?" But the title that she gave herself was the Maid of Balladoo. I slipped me arm around her waist and took her by the hand. I showed her my father's garden down by the river bank, where the sheep and lambs do sport and play, and the trout and the salmon too. And says I, "Sweet maid, don't be afraid for to leave I'll Balladoo." Well, it was with great persuasion that I got her for to give consent, and hand in hand together 'twas Hilltown down we went, where we drank liquor of the best and some of the mountain dew, and she soon forgot the vow she made when leaving Balladoo. It was on a summer's evening, all in the month of June, as I sat sitting silently condoling at my loom. My scissors they cut sweetly, and my shuttle nimbly flew, when I first composed these verses on the Maid of Balladoo.
Well, I was born and brought up in the Kingdom of Mourne, and I'm sure you've all heard of the Mountains of Mourne, which is a wonderful mountain range, which and so Mourne encompasses the mountains, obviously, but also a very large coastal plain. And the capital of Mourne is Kilkeel, which is the little fishing village where I was born. Kilkeel meaning narrow church. And Mourne was all about, obviously, there was stone, granite quarried in the mountains, but farming and fishing, and then linen production would have been a big thing in the past. And there was also, I suppose, if you like, the sea and the land came together at times when people collected seaweed or the wrack from the seashore to fertilize the land. And there's a very wide, shallow bay called Mill Bay near Kilkeel. And in the shallow waters of Mill Bay, artificial wrack beds were created using granite stones. And in spring, up to 100 carts would be gathered there under the full moon when low tide exposed the wrack. And 3 species of seaweed grow there in Mill Bay: sea whistle, bladder, and lazy wrack. And apart from the cutweed harvested from the foreshore, there was also the driftweed thrown up on the Mourne beaches after storms. And the wrack was so valuable to the farms as fertilizer that the rights governing the gathering of it were applied all along the Mourne shore. And Joe Dorn, who was a teacher of mine back in the day, he wrote, "In Cranfield, the weed clearing was done on signal. The appointed guardian judged when the time was right and raised a whin bush on a high pole at Patterson's so that farmers knew it was time to come and take the big piles of wrack from the shore. Often the families cut the weed with hand hooks and by the light of hurricane lamps when low tide was at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And despite the unpleasantness of the task, when they often had to stand thigh deep in freezing cold water, there was a lot of crack and a lot of courting went on, and a lot of romances began in Mill Bay on gathering the wrack. So in Mourne, there was always a lot of emigration as well from different parts of the island of Ireland. Even when I was young in the 50s and 60s, a lot of people emigrated mostly to North America and Canada. And in those days, they would have left from Warren Point, or what they called Warren's Point back in the day. So this is an emigration song called Dick McKnight's Farewell to Mourne, and it brings together fishing and farming in a way, and also the linen industry as well in this song. Adieu, adieu, ye hills and flowery dales that lie round Mourne shore, ye winding roads and sweet repose, will I ever see you more? Where I spent many a happy day, but now, alas, they're o'er, since the girl I love has banished me far, far from Mourne shore. Last night I went to see my girl, to see what she would say, still thinking she'd take pity on me before I sailed away. She said I loved a sailor like the boy that I adore. I'll wait on him for 7 long years, so trouble me no more. Adieu unto ye Wansley's Grove, down by the bleaching mill, where the linen webs are daily spread, the purling streams run still, where the pinks and daisies late in bloom, the spotted trout there plays. With my bait and hook delight I took to spend my youthful days. Our ship, she lies at Warren's Point, just ready to set sail. May the Lord then send her safely o'er, with a soft and a pleasant gale. Had I 10,000 pounds in gold, or 10 times that much more, I would freely share it with the girl I left behind on moor and shore.
Lovely. So I'm going to continue with a song called The Flower of Maharalio. And I first heard about this song from in Castlewellan, County Down, many years ago. And it so happened there was a singing session on a Sunday morning after the County Down Fla Ceol. And the song was being sung was by Cathal McConnell, who's a well-known singer up in our part of the world. But halfway through the song, the local police dropped in to pay the local landlord a visit and caught everybody having a quiet drink. It turned out that the local constable was a fiddle player and persuaded his sergeant to play a few more tunes before throwing everybody out. It's one of the sweetest love songs that we know, and the last verse implies that there is a parental opposition to the marriage. Sean O'Boyle, whom I referred to earlier, learned the words and air from his father, so it's got away back to the 1930s. And other versions of this song were published in the Sam Henry collection and Irish Street Ballads. But I also, it came to mind when we were thinking about what we were doing here, that a music teacher that I knew, but was not interested in folk music. And I reminded him that Maharale, the townland where he came from, it was in his own parish that he was. But this gentleman was genuinely taken aback to find that he had never heard of the song. So I took it in hand and off I went to get him a set of words and music. And since he's a piano player, what better could you have? So I'm glad to say that he picked up on the folk music and started to, bring folk songs into his repertoire. So it pleased me a lot.
That's why I'm going to sing it.
Yeah.
The Flower of Maharali. One pleasant summer's morning, when all the flowers are blooming low, nature was adorning, and the wee birds sweetly singing, oh, I met my love near Bunbridge Town, my charming blue-eyed Sally, oh. She's the queen of the county down, the flower of Maharali, oh. With admiration I did gaze upon this blue-eyed creature, oh, Adam wasn't half so pleased when he met Eve in Eden, oh. Her skin was like the lily white that blows in yonder valley, oh. She's my queen and my heart's delight, the flower of Maharali, oh. Her yellow hair in ringlets clung, her shoes were Spanish leather, oh. Her bonnet with blue ribbon strung, her scarlet cuff and a feather, oh. Like Venus bright, she did appear, my charming blue-eyed Sally, oh. She's the girl that I love, dear, the flower of Maharali, oh. I hope the day will surely come when we'll join hands together, oh. Then I'll bring my the flower of Mahario. Well, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I was so transported, I didn't realise that you finished. You've got time for another one. You've got another song.
Do we have time for it? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
You had another
okay.
one, had you?
Yeah.
The black. Yeah, Morris.
Okay. Yeah. This is a song called "The Blackbird of Mullaghmore," and this Irish allegorical songs are generally associated with politics, but in the songs of the Jacobites, the old pretenders referred to as the Blackbird, or during the Napoleonic Wars, Boney became the Great Linnet, and later Charles Stuart figuratively represents the Blackbird of Avondale. Now, this song, "The Blackbird of Mullaghmore," has got nothing to do with national politics. It has everything to do with the manufacture of illicit whiskey or poaching. And the blackbird of the song is the code name for the hidden poaching still. Owen McAteer, referred to earlier, was recorded singing the Blackbird of Mullaghmore for as I Roved Out series back in July 1952. And Owen was rather defensive about eliciting any more information about the still. He was even more evasive about the secret hiding place, and he refused to reveal the source for the words. Right. When he was asked who destroyed the still, he said, "Some authorities or other, I suppose. They wrecked her. They tore the still out." And when asked where he got the words from, he said, "I was courting a wee girl and I took the words out of my pocket and didn't give them back to her." So this is the Blackbird of Mullaghmore. Oh, come all ye gay young fellas that wander by this way. If you call in to have a glass of the reckoning you must pay, I'll supply you with a good friend, and your check will join encore, and you'll see my blackbird clucking on the hills of Mullaghmore. Well, it's for your loyal blackbird, she's of the best of game. Her offspring are well proven in America, France, and Spain. Her check has gained her credit upon many's the foreign shore, and now she's sitting clucking on the hills of Mullaghmore. Well, it's for your loyal blackbird, they didn't use her well, and the hardship she has undergone, there's no mortal man can tell. When her cage door was opened, they rushed in by the score, and they put my bird from clucking on the hills of Mullaghmore. So our blackbird's going to leave us now, which grieves the neighbours all, and I hope she'll have good fortune until on her way to call. She's going up to yonder mountain to rest in a fine still, and she'll spend her summer season at the foot of the sheep hill. And our blackbird's coming home again, but not to the same place. And I hope our friends and neighbours won't bring her to disgrace. And the lovely lark and linnet and the thrush will join encore to welcome home our blackbird to the hills of Mullaghmore. Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jane and Morris. That was really nice. Really good way to spend an afternoon. Anybody got any comments, questions? Everybody on the chat is saying how much they'd enjoyed it.
That's nice. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right, nobody wants to say anything. Right, well, thank you very much indeed to our 4 speakers and singers. And I hope you've all enjoyed it. We'll see you all again on the 6th of November. Everybody happy? Yes. Goodbye then.
Thank you very much.
Very well.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.